Oh, look at this. Look at Billy. Is he hot?
And the manager and a player. Billy wants to get at Reggie. And he's being restrained. Billy gets around, but now Yogi's got him and trying to wrestle him down.
Yogi's got him.
I can understand some of the difficulties that you're going to run into a lot better than I did before, and I handle them a little differently than I did before. Before, my Italian-Portuguese temper would come up, and I'd revert back. Now I tease and agitate the ones who talk with crooked tongue.
Billy Martin was a brilliant winner, but 5 baseball legends became men he could never forgive. On June 18, 1977, the New York Yankees played the Boston Red Sox at Fenway Park. The game was shown on national television. In the 6th inning, Boston's Jim Rice hit a soft single to right field. Reggie Jackson jogged after the ball. He did not sprint. To Martin, watching closely in the dugout, it looked like Jackson did not care. Martin believed hustle was everything. A player who would not chase a ball was disrespecting the game and the manager who ran it. If this story already has you fired up, tap the hype button and give this video hype. Martin made a fast decision right there in the middle of the inning. He pulled Jackson off the field and sent out Paul Blair to take his place. Jackson jogged back to the dugout, confused and angry. He wanted answers. Martin gave him none that he wanted to hear. Words turned sharp and fast. Voices rose fast. Martin lunged toward Jackson. Coaches grabbed him and held him back before things went further. Elston Howard, Yogi Berra, and Dick Howser pulled the two men apart while the cameras kept rolling. Millions of people watched their manager nearly fight his own star player, live, in front of the whole country. It was not a small, forgettable moment. It was a real warning sign. Billy Martin did not just lose his temper that day. He showed the country exactly who he was. He was a man who could not stand to share control of his team with anyone, not even a superstar the front office had paid millions of dollars to bring in. That single explosion at Fenway Park would follow him for the rest of his career. It was the first big crack in a story that would repeat itself again and again, with different men in different uniforms, for the same reason every single time. Billy Martin needed to be the one in charge. When somebody challenged that, somebody usually got hurt, and often it was Martin himself who paid the highest price. To understand why Martin exploded that day, you have to understand where he came from. His full name was Alfred Manuel Martin, but everyone called him Billy. He grew up scrappy and tough, and he carried that toughness with him his entire life. He fought hard for everything he ever got in the game. As a young player, he was an infielder for the great New York Yankees teams of the 1950s. He played under a manager named Casey Stengel, and Stengel taught him how to think about the game every single second, not just when the ball was in play. Martin learned to look for any small edge. He learned gamesmanship. He learned how to use pressure, both physical and mental, to break down the other team. The Yankees teams Martin played on were not just good. They were one of the most successful dynasties in the history of the sport, winning championship after championship through the 1950s. Being part of that world shaped how Martin saw the game for the rest of his life. He came to believe that winning required total commitment, total toughness, and total respect for whoever was running the team. He never let go of that belief, even decades later, long after the sport around him had started to change. He carried all of that with him when he became a manager himself. As a manager, Martin built a style that people started calling Billy Ball. It was built on speed and risk. His teams stole bases constantly. They tried hit-and-run plays. They even attempted to steal home plate, one of the riskiest plays in the entire sport. Every part of Billy Ball was designed to force a mistake out of the other team. A stolen base attempt put pressure on the catcher. A hit and run put pressure on the infield. A well-timed bunt put pressure on the pitcher and the corner fielders at the exact same time. Martin wanted his team to pressure the other side on every single pitch. He believed that if you kept attacking without letting up, the other team would eventually crack under the strain. This style worked, and it worked fast, almost everywhere he went. In 1969, Martin took his very first big league managing job with the Minnesota Twins, and he led them straight to the American League West title with a record of 97 wins and 65 losses. Even in that first season, the pattern that would define his whole career was already showing itself. Martin clashed with team owner Calvin Griffith over how much say the front office should have in running the club. He also became involved in an off-field physical altercation with one of his own pitchers, Dave Boswell. Winning and conflict were already arriving together, right from the very start. From 1971 to 1973, Martin managed the Detroit Tigers, and he guided them to the American League East title in 1972. Behind that success sat familiar friction, this time with front office executives and veteran players who bristled at his public criticism of roster decisions and player effort. A few years later, from 1973 to 1975, Martin took over the Texas Rangers and nearly won Manager of the Year honors in 1974 after another fast turnaround. Once again, the wins came with conflict. this time in the form of disputes with ownership and the executive board over who truly controlled the direction of the team. Later, from 1980 to 1982, Martin managed the Oakland Athletics, leading them to the American League West title in 1981. His young starting pitchers threw an enormous number of complete games under his aggressive system, and several of them later dealt with serious arm injuries. Front office staff grew increasingly uneasy about how hard Martin pushed his pitching staff in the pursuit of quick wins. By far, though, Martin's most public and most complicated battles happened in New York, across 5 separate stints managing the Yankees between 1975 and 1988. No matter which uniform he wore, fans loved him for the fast turnarounds. Owners loved him for it too, at least in the beginning. But there was a pattern hiding underneath all that early success everywhere he worked. Martin was fired or forced out as a major league manager 8 different times across his entire career. The intensity that made him so effective also made him almost impossible to work with for very long. Baseball itself was changing underneath him the whole time. When Martin played the game, managers held enormous power. A player who argued too much could be benched, fined, or shipped off to another team with almost no say in the matter. By the time Martin was managing, that world was disappearing. Players had gained real rights. They could become free agents. They could sign long, guaranteed contracts. Owners, meanwhile, were becoming more hands-on than ever before, especially in New York, where one owner in particular wanted to control almost everything that happened on his team. Martin's early managing jobs proved that he could win almost anywhere, with almost any roster. That talent alone made owners eager to hire him again and again, even after very public failures. That owner was George Steinbrenner, and no single relationship shaped the rest of Billy Martin's career more than the one he had with him. George Steinbrenner did not think of the Yankees as just a baseball team. He thought of it as a business empire, and he believed that final say on almost everything belonged to him, the owner. He wanted championships right away, every single year, and he was willing to spend huge amounts of money to get them. He also wanted a direct hand in decisions about players, trades, and public image. Steinbrenner ran the Yankees with a hands-on style that left almost no decision untouched by the owner's office. He checked in constantly. He demanded clear explanations for every decision made on the field. He expected results immediately, not eventually. This kind of ownership was still fairly new in baseball at the time, and it clashed directly with an older tradition where the manager, not the owner, was seen as the person truly in charge of the team on a daily basis. Billy Martin saw things very differently. He believed the manager ran the team on the field, full stop. In Martin's mind, a person sitting in an office had no business telling him how to use his lineup or handle his players. This single disagreement, repeated over and over, defined their entire relationship. Steinbrenner hired Martin as Yankees manager 5 separate times. He gave him the job in 1975, then again in 1979, then again in 1983, then again in 1985, and one final time in 1988. Each time, the same basic story played out. Martin would arrive and immediately energize the team. Steinbrenner would praise him publicly. Then, within months, tension would build as the two men clashed over control. Eventually, Steinbrenner would fire Martin outright, or apply enough pressure that Martin would resign. What made this cycle so strange was that the two men genuinely respected each other underneath all the conflict. Steinbrenner admired how badly Martin wanted to win, and how much energy he brought to a struggling team. Martin, for his part, loved the resources and the prestige that came with managing in New York. Their bond was real, but so was their constant battle for control, and neither man ever fully figured out how to have one without the other. Steinbrenner would often go around Martin and speak directly to star players about strategy or personal matters, which Martin saw as a direct insult to his authority. Martin, in turn, would criticize Steinbrenner's baseball knowledge to reporters, which embarrassed an owner who prided himself on being deeply involved in the team he had built. Their combustible partnership also had a commercial side that mattered a great deal to Steinbrenner. Fights, headlines, and controversy kept the Yankees in the news every single day, and Steinbrenner understood that attention translated into ticket sales and television ratings. He was not simply a bystander to Martin's temper. In many ways, he benefited from it, which is part of why he kept bringing Martin back, no matter how badly a previous stint had ended. Nowhere did this tension explode more publicly than in the pressure Steinbrenner created before the 1977 season. That year, Steinbrenner signed superstar outfielder Reggie Jackson to a massive 5-year contract, even though Martin had openly opposed bringing Jackson onto the team. Martin wanted a defense-first, small ball type roster. Jackson was the opposite of that. He was a high-profile, high-strikeout power hitter who saw himself as the face of the franchise. Martin was handed a star he did not want and told to make it work, and that pressure sat underneath everything that followed, including the blow-up at Fenway Park. By the summer of 1978, the strain between Martin, Jackson, and Steinbrenner had built for over a year, and it finally broke him. Worn down and hearing rumors that he was about to be replaced, Martin spoke to reporters at an airport in Chicago. He said something that could not be taken back. He said, "The two of them deserve each other. One's a born liar, and the other's convicted." Those words made Martin's position completely impossible. He resigned as Yankees manager the very next day. Yet in a twist that showed exactly how strange this partnership really was, only days later, Martin was brought back out onto the field at an Old Timers Day event at Yankee Stadium and announced as the team's future manager for the following season. People in the stands could hardly believe what they were seeing. Fans cheered, cameras flashed. A man who had just resigned in disgrace was already being welcomed back as a hero. That moment revealed something important about both men. Steinbrenner did not simply put up with Martin's chaos out of loyalty. He also understood that the chaos itself brought attention, sold tickets, and kept the Yankees in the headlines. And Martin, whatever damage he caused, could still manage a winning baseball team better than almost anyone else in the sport. Their partnership was built on that uncomfortable trade-off, again and again, for over a decade. Even the timing of that Old Timers Day announcement said something about how the two men operated together. Steinbrenner understood theater. He understood that fans wanted drama as much as they wanted wins. And bringing Martin back in such a public, dramatic way turned an embarrassing resignation into another unforgettable headline. Underneath all of it sat one steady truth about Martin. He simply could not function for very long inside a structure where another person held equal or greater power over his team. Steinbrenner controlled the organization from above. That alone was enough to guarantee conflict, no matter how many times the two men tried to make it work. But Steinbrenner was not the only person standing in Martin's way. The star player Steinbrenner had signed against Martin's wishes was about to become the center of the most famous feud of Martin's entire career. The Fenway Park explosion was not the start of the Martin and Jackson feud, and it was not the end of it either. It was just the loudest early moment in a much longer power struggle between two men who both believed they deserved to run the show. Reggie Jackson arrived in New York in 1977 with a 5-year contract and a level of confidence that most players never show. He did not hide his talent or his ego. He believed he was the most important player on the team, and in many ways the numbers backed him up. Martin, on the other hand, had built his entire career on defense, discipline, and small ball execution. He valued players who moved runners over, played tight defense, and followed orders without question. Jackson represented almost the exact opposite of everything Martin trusted. The situation inside that Yankees clubhouse was really a three-way struggle for power, not just a two-man feud. Steinbrenner held corporate authority from above. Martin demanded total control on the field below, and Jackson, backed by the owner's money and his own enormous self-belief, refused to simply follow either man's lead without pushing back. Team captain Thurman Munson tried to hold the middle ground between all three of them, which was never an easy place to stand. This was not simply a clash of two strong personalities. It was a clash between two different eras of baseball. Jackson had something that players from Martin's playing days never had. He had grown up in a different baseball world, one where a star player expected to be treated as a partner in the organization's success, not simply as an employee following orders from above without question. He had long-term contract security, he had massive individual star power built through the media, and most importantly, he had the full backing of the team's owner, who had paid him millions of dollars and expected results. Martin came from a system where a manager could bench, fine, or trade a difficult player with almost no pushback. Jackson could push back, and push back hard, and there was very little Martin could do to stop him. Strangely enough, the 1977 season became proof of just how complicated this whole situation really was. The Yankees were a mess behind the scenes. Martin and Jackson barely spoke to each other off the field. Reporters wrote constantly about the tension inside the clubhouse. And yet, the team still won the World Series that year. During that same tense season, the team somehow held together long enough for the postseason to arrive, and Jackson himself delivered one of the most famous individual performances in postseason history, hitting 3 home runs in a single game during Game 6 of the World Series. The very player Martin distrusted the most became the hero who helped bring the championship home. It was hard to argue a player was destroying team chemistry when that same player had just delivered the biggest moment of the entire season in front of the whole country. That contradiction made the feud even harder for Martin to accept. He could not simply say Jackson was hurting the team, because at the biggest moment of the year, Jackson had carried it. The following July, in 1978, the conflict reached a breaking point during a game against the Kansas City Royals. Martin gave Jackson a direct sign to swing away at the plate. Instead, Jackson attempted to bunt, not once, but 3 times in a row, and struck out. To Martin, this was not just a bad baseball decision. It was open defiance in front of the entire team. Martin suspended Jackson for 5 games as punishment. That suspension set off the final chain of events that led to Martin's resignation days later, when the pressure of the ongoing battle with both Jackson and Steinbrenner finally spilled out into his public comments to reporters. The fallout from that moment cost Martin his job, at least for a little while. It is also worth noting that Jackson had genuine reasons to feel like Martin never gave him a fair chance to belong. He arrived already carrying the weight of a manager's public opposition to his own signing. From day one, he was playing for a man who had not wanted him on the team in the first place. And that starting point made trust difficult to build, no matter how well Jackson performed on the field. Looking at the whole story honestly, Jackson was not an innocent bystander in any of this. He could be proud, stubborn, and openly resistant to instructions he did not agree with. But the responsibility for managing that conflict sat with Martin, and Martin chose confrontation over communication again and again. He treated Jackson's confidence as a personal insult instead of finding a way to use it. He turned private disagreements into public wars fought through newspapers and television cameras. In the end, that pattern did not just damage his relationship with one star player, it damaged his own authority as a leader, and it played a direct role in pushing him out of the job he had fought so hard to get. It also helps to remember what Jackson actually brought to that team on the field. Beyond just his personality, he was one of the most feared power hitters in the entire league, the kind of player who could change a game with a single swing. Martin never stopped respecting that talent, even while he could not stand the way Jackson carried himself off the field. That tension between admiration and resentment sat underneath almost every single interaction the two men ever had. Reggie Jackson was not the only powerful personality inside that Yankees clubhouse standing up to Martin. The team's own captain, a man Martin actually respected, would prove that this problem went far deeper than one difficult superstar. Thurman Munson's relationship with Billy Martin was not built on hatred. It was something more complicated than that, and it says a lot about Martin that even a man he respected could still end up fighting with him. Munson was the captain of the Yankees. He won the American League Most Valuable Player Award in 1976. He represented everything the team wanted to be seen as: tough, hard-nosed, and blue-collar. Teammates followed him. Reporters trusted him. When Martin took over as manager in August of 1975, he stepped into a clubhouse where Munson already held real power over the other players, power that did not come from a title on paper, but from years of earned respect. Munson had built that respect the hard way, through years of gritty, unglamorous play behind the plate, blocking pitches, calling games, and taking hits from opposing runners without complaint. He was not flashy. He did not crave attention the way some other stars did. His value came from steady, dependable toughness, which is exactly the kind of quality Martin claimed to admire most in a baseball player. That created a problem, because Martin was not used to sharing influence with anyone, even a respected leader like Munson. Martin liked to control small details. He had strong opinions about pitch selection, defensive positioning, and exactly when a runner should try to take an extra base. Munson, confident in his own baseball instincts, did not always agree, and he was not afraid to say so out loud. One clear example happened in July of 1978 at Metropolitan Stadium. Martin called for a steal of home plate, one of the riskiest plays in baseball. Munson had doubts about the call before it even happened. The play led to a disputed ruling at the plate, and Martin, Munson, and the umpires all became part of a heated, public argument that spilled out in front of the crowd. Even with disagreements like that one, Munson played a role that nobody else on the team could fill. He acted as a bridge between Martin and the rest of the roster. When Martin wanted something done a certain way, Munson often carried that message into the clubhouse in a way that players actually listened to, something Martin himself was rarely able to do directly. Martin needed him for exactly that reason, whether he admitted it out loud to anyone or not, including himself. This is really the most important thing this particular relationship reveals about Martin. His problems were not only about modern free agents or big money contracts. Munson was old school, tough, and shared many of the same values Martin claimed to care about most. Yet even with a captain who respected the game the same way Martin did, conflict still found a way to surface. That tells you the real issue was never just about money or the modern player, it was about control itself, and Martin's need to hold every bit of it, even from people who were mostly on his side. Munson's steady influence stood out even more when you compare him to other veteran leaders around the league during that same period. Around baseball, a new type of independent, outspoken veteran player was becoming common. Men who questioned old rules and old-style authority, the same way Munson sometimes did with Martin. Munson never went that far in public, but his quiet confidence came from the same shifting ground that was lifting up players all across the sport during those years, whether Martin wanted to admit it or not. Munson's story ended in tragedy. In August of 1979, he died in a plane crash. His death devastated the entire Yankees organization, and it hit Martin especially hard. Munson had been the stabilizing force that helped hold Martin's first Yankees tenure together, and that steady presence was suddenly gone for good. Even years later, people around the team still pointed to the loss of Munson as a turning point. Once that steady bridge between Martin and the roster disappeared, disagreements that Munson might have quietly smoothed over instead grew louder and lasted much longer than they probably needed to. Martin's battles were not finished, though. In the years that followed, another expensive, high-profile Yankees star would find himself in the crosshairs of Martin's sharpest public attacks, this time played out through jokes in front of the entire national press. Dave Winfield became the next symbol of everything Martin resented about the new era of baseball. In December of 1980, Steinbrenner signed Winfield to a massive 10-year contract, reportedly worth $23 million, with a special clause tied to the cost of living that made the deal grow even larger over time. Steinbrenner was furious once he realized just how much the contract would actually end up costing him, and Winfield quickly became a target for criticism from both the owner and the manager. The size of that contract shocked the entire sport at the time. 10 years and $23 million represented a level of long-term financial security that almost no baseball player had ever received before. For an owner like Steinbrenner, who wanted control over every part of his organization, locking up that much money for that many years into a single unpredictable relationship created constant stress, especially once performance did not match the price tag in his mind every single season. Winfield, meanwhile, simply wanted to be judged on the same terms as any other player, without his contract turning into a constant subject of public argument. It is important to keep one detail straight here. Steinbrenner was the one who gave Winfield the nickname Mr. May, a jab comparing him unfavorably to Reggie Jackson's nickname, Mr. October. That insult belonged to Steinbrenner, not to Martin. Martin's criticism of Winfield took a different shape. Rather than mocking his clutch hitting, Martin focused on the details of his everyday play, questioning his routes in the outfield, his base-running instincts, and how consistently he hit the cutoff man on his throws back to the infield. That criticism became famous on August 4, 1983, during a game in Toronto. During warm-ups between innings, Winfield made a throw that accidentally struck and killed a seagull on the field. Local authorities briefly detained him afterward, and reporters, half-joking, asked Martin whether Winfield had hit the bird on purpose. Martin's response became one of the most quoted lines of his career. He said, "Ridiculous. That's the first time he's hit the cutoff man all year." Reporters loved lines like that, and they printed it everywhere across the country the very next morning. It made Martin look sharp, quick-witted, and completely unbothered by pressure. The line was funny, and it spread quickly through newspapers and highlight reels. But underneath the humor sat something more serious. Martin was using a national audience to publicly mock one of his own star players. It was clever. It was sharp. It was also exactly the kind of public attack that chipped away at trust inside his own clubhouse. Martin had a consistent habit of choosing a good headline over a private conversation. Reporters loved him for it. His own teams often paid the price for it in the long run, through damaged relationships that never fully healed. It is worth remembering that Winfield was not just a name on a contract. He was a genuine talent, a dependable everyday player who showed up year after year. Martin's public jabs did not change Winfield's ability. What they did change was the tone inside the clubhouse, where players watched how their manager treated a highly paid teammate in public and drew their own conclusions about what kind of trust they could expect from him. By this point in the story, one question becomes impossible to avoid. What had actually given players like Jackson and Winfield the power to stand up to a manager the way they did, when players from Martin's own era rarely could? The answer to that question was not a person Martin fought with directly on the field. It was a man working in offices and courtrooms, quietly building the system that made all of it possible. Marvin Miller never wore a Yankees uniform, and he never argued with Martin face-to-face in a dugout. Yet in many ways, he may have been the most important opponent of Martin's entire career, because he helped build the entire system that made men like Jackson and Winfield so hard for Martin to control. Miller served as executive director of the Major League Baseball Players Association from 1966 until 1982. During that time, he worked to tear down what was called the reserve system, an old set of rules that gave teams almost total control over a player's career. Under that system, a player could not simply leave for a better offer somewhere else. He belonged to his team, year after year, whether he liked it or not. Before Miller arrived, players had almost no leverage in contract talks at all. They could not shop their services to other teams, no matter how well they played or how unfair their current deal felt. Miller organized players across every team in the league, built a union with real strength behind it, and slowly changed the balance of power between labor and ownership across the entire sport, not just in a handful of cases. In 1975, a ruling known as the Seitz decision, involving pitchers Andy Messersmith and Dave McNally, helped break that old system apart for good. It opened the door to modern free agency. Players could now become available to other teams. They could negotiate long, guaranteed contracts. For the first time, star players had real financial independence, and that independence came with real power. Martin had grown up entirely inside the old system, both as a player and later as a manager. In that world, a manager or a team could punish a player who caused trouble by benching him, fining him, or trading him away, often with very little the player could do about it. Miller's reforms took much of that power away. Guaranteed contracts meant a struggling or difficult player could no longer simply be threatened into obedience. Martin argued publicly, in interview after interview, that these massive guaranteed deals made players comfortable and lazy, and that comfort made them far harder for any manager to reach and to motivate. That view was popular among many older baseball people at the time, not just Martin. It is worth pushing back gently on that view here. Not every long contract led to worse effort or worse results, and plenty of well-paid stars, including some Martin managed himself, kept performing at a high level for years. What seems more accurate is that Martin experienced player rights mainly as a threat to his own authority, not simply as a change in fairness for the athletes themselves. Miller's influence reached far beyond just the handful of stars Martin managed directly. Around the league, veteran players like catcher Ted Simmons pushed for the same kind of independence, questioning old assumptions about how much control a team should hold over a player's life and career. Simmons even played a large part of one season without a signed contract, simply to make a point about fairness. Players like Simmons faced criticism from traditional baseball people who saw their independence as a threat to team unity, the exact same accusation Martin leveled at his own stars in New York. Players like him were proof that this shift in power was not limited to one clubhouse or one city. It was reshaping the entire sport at the same time. This is really the moment where the whole story comes together. Jackson's ability to act like an independent superstar, Winfield's long guaranteed contract, the growing willingness of players everywhere to push back against old-style intimidation, all of it traced back to the world Miller helped create. Managers could no longer rule purely through fear. They had to learn to communicate, negotiate, and share power in ways that Martin, by nature and by training, found almost impossible to accept. Billy Martin was not simply fighting difficult personalities one at a time. He was fighting the direction baseball itself was moving in, and that fight was one he was never going to win, no matter how many games his teams took on the field. Billy Martin's 5 defining conflicts were never random. Each man controlled something Martin believed belonged to him alone as the manager. Marvin Miller helped every single player in the sport gain a level of control over their own careers that simply did not exist when Martin first put on a Yankees uniform. Here is the honest verdict on Billy Martin. His greatest weakness was never simply a bad temper. It ran deeper than that. He believed that real leadership required total obedience from everyone around him, and when the world stopped giving him that obedience, he did not know how to adjust. He could rebuild a lineup overnight. He could pressure a defense into mistakes through sheer aggression. He could take a losing team and turn it into a contender within a single season. What he could not do, again and again, across every single team he ever managed, was share power with anyone for very long, whether that person was an owner, a superstar, a trusted captain, or an entire union fighting for basic fairness on behalf of every player in the sport. This same competitive fire showed up even outside his own clubhouse, in his rivalries with other managers around the American League. He traded barbs for years with Sparky Anderson, a calmer, more structured leader who Martin thought was too cautious for his own good. He battled just as hard against Don Zimmer during tense pennant races, arguing over pitching moves and umpire calls from opposing dugouts. Even against men he was not directly employed by, Martin could not simply let a disagreement go. That same intensity that made him brilliant also burned through nearly every team and every relationship he built. Fast success, followed by exhaustion and collapse, followed him from Minnesota to Detroit to Texas to New York to Oakland and back to New York again and again. Teammates who played for him in different cities, at different points in his career, often described the exact same cycle. The first few months felt electric. Losing teams suddenly believed they could win. Then, slowly, the constant pressure and the constant conflict wore people down, and the very intensity that had lifted the team up in the beginning became the thing that eventually tore it apart. It was the same story, told with different names, over and over across 2 decades. Martin belonged to an older tradition of baseball leadership, a line that stretched back through managers like John McGraw, Leo Durocher, and his own mentor Casey Stengel. In that tradition, the manager was the unquestioned director of the team, someone whose word simply was not challenged. As unions grew stronger, as contracts grew longer, and as owners grew more hands-on, that old style of leadership slowly became impossible to sustain. Teams began looking instead for managers who could communicate clearly, work alongside front office analysts, and build real relationships with players instead of simply commanding them. Martin, brilliant as he was, never fully made that adjustment, and in many ways, he never really wanted to. And yet, even after everything, it is worth ending where any honest account of Billy Martin has to end. He understood the game of baseball on a level that very few people ever have. He could read a defense, sense weakness in an opponent, and squeeze wins out of teams that had no business competing. He made every single game he managed feel urgent, feel dangerous, feel like something important was actually at stake. His failures and his brilliance were never separate stories. They were always the exact same story wrapped inside one restless, unforgettable man. Billy Martin understood how to win a baseball game, and even after all the damage he caused, few managers ever made the game feel more alive.